Arrogant billionaire spurned hundreds of women, but one changed his life forever. Hello, let's start another beautiful story. Welcome to my channel. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Let's go. The September sun cast long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Carter Technologies' penthouse office, painting angular shapes across Leonard Carter's mahogany desk. He stood with his back to the sprawling Manhattan skyline, his steel-grey eyes fixed on the trembling young man before him. "Mr. Peterson, do you know why I succeeded where others failed?" Leonard's voice carried the practiced calm of a predator toying with its prey. He adjusted his platinum cufflinks, a habit he'd developed over years of delivering bad news to good people. "No, sir," Peterson stammered, clutching his portfolio like a shield. "Because I never let sentiment cloud my judgment." Leonard moved round his desk with deliberate slowness. "Your proposal to delay the layoffs until after the holidays is admirable. Touching, even." His lips curved into a smile that never reached his eyes. "But sentiment costs money. And money, Mr. Peterson, is what keeps this company at the forefront of innovation." Through the glass walls of his office, Leonard could see his executive team watching, their faces a mixture of pity and relief. Pity for Peterson, relief that they weren't in his shoes. The young executive's proposal had been well researched, showing how maintaining staff morale through the holiday season could benefit long-term productivity. In another company it might have worked, but not here, not in Leonard Carter's empire. "Sir, these people have families, and they'll find new jobs." Leonard cut him off smoothly. "Preferably at our competitors, where their emotional decision-making can become someone else's problem." He returned to his chair, a custom-made piece that cost more than most people's cars. "That will be all, Mr. Peterson." As the door closed behind Peterson's defeated form, Leonard's assistant Claire entered with his evening schedule. She'd worked for him for 7 years, the longest any assistant had lasted, primarily because she understood the cardinal rule: efficiency over empathy. "Your sister Eleanor called again," Claire reported, her voice professionally neutral. "She insists on speaking with you about the Family Foundation's annual gala." Leonard suppressed a sigh. Eleanor, his younger sister, was the only person who still tried to drag him into what she called humanitarian obligations. "Tell her I'll consider it if she emails a proper proposal through the appropriate channels." "She said you'd say that." Claire's lips twitched. "She also said to remind you that you haven't attended a single family event since your father's funeral 3 years ago." For a moment, Leonard's carefully maintained facade cracked. The mention of his father still had that effect, though he'd never admit it. Richard Carter had built their family's initial fortune through real estate, but it was Leonard who had transformed it into a tech empire. His father's last words to him had been about legacy, not the financial kind, but something more intangible, something Leonard had chosen to ignore. "Schedule a video call with Eleanor for tomorrow morning," he conceded. 15 minutes, no more." Claire nodded and retreated, leaving Leonard alone with the dying sunlight and his thoughts. He turned to face the window, watching the city transition from day to night. From this height, people looked like ants, scurrying about their insignificant lives, driven by emotions and connections he'd long ago decided were unnecessary. His phone buzzed. Mark Dawson, his oldest friend and head of legal, requesting an urgent meeting about the Thompson merger. Leonard welcomed the distraction. Mergers were clean, logical, governed by numbers and contracts rather than messy human emotions. "Send him in," he called out to Claire. Mark entered, his usual confident stride somewhat hesitant. "We need to talk about the merger, Leo." Only Mark still called him that, a remnant from their Harvard days. "Problem? You could say that." Mark dropped a file on his desk. "Their lead counsel is proving challenging. She's found several potential antitrust issues we hadn't anticipated. Leonard's interest peaked. It had been months since anyone had presented a genuine challenge to his plans. Who is she? Amy Reed. Mark's expression was unreadable. Harvard Law, class of 15, built her reputation defending small tech companies against corporate giants. She's brilliant, ruthless, and apparently immune to the usual methods of persuasion. Everyone has a price, Mark. That's just it, Leo. Mark leaned forward. I don't think she does, and she's requesting a meeting, with you specifically. Not your legal team, not your negotiators. You. Leonard felt something he hadn't experienced in years, genuine curiosity. He opened the file, finding himself looking at a photograph of a woman with piercing dark eyes and an expression that suggested she'd rather be anywhere else than in front of a camera. Amy Reed looked nothing like the polished corporate lawyers he usually encountered. There was something raw, almost defiant, in her gaze. Schedule it, he said, surprising himself as much as Mark. Tomorrow afternoon. After Mark left, Leonard remained at his desk, the file still open to Amy Reed's photograph. The last rays of sunlight caught the empty crystal tumbler on his desk, creating prisms that danced across her image. For the first time in years, Leonard Carter felt something shift in his carefully ordered world. A slight tremor in the foundations of his empire, built on logic and control. He didn't know it yet, but tomorrow would change everything. In his pocket, he fingered the worn silver compass that had belonged to his mother, the only sentimental object he allowed himself to keep. Its needle had long since stopped working, frozen, pointing north, much like Leonard himself had been frozen in his ways for so long. As night fell over New York City, Leonard Carter sat alone in his office, unaware that he was about to embark on a journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about success, power, and the true cost of a life lived without love. Amy Reed stood in the elevator of Carter Technologies' gleaming headquarters, her reflection fragmenting across mirrored walls. She adjusted her simple navy blazer, not designer but well-tailored, a conscious choice that set her apart from the Chanel-clad executives she typically faced across negotiating tables. The contents of her briefcase could torpedo Leonard Carter's carefully orchestrated merger, and they both knew it. What Carter didn't know was that she'd spent the last 3 months building this case, poring over documents until her eyes burned, tracking paper trails through shell companies and offshore accounts. Not because it was her job, though it was, but because she'd seen firsthand what happened when companies like Carter Technologies swallowed smaller firms whole, leaving broken dreams and shattered lives in their wake. The elevator chimed at the penthouse level. Amy took a deep breath, touching the small silver pendant at her neck, her father's wedding ring strung on a chain, a reminder of why she fought these battles. Ms. Reed, a sleek assistant, rose from her desk. Mr. Carter is ready for you. Amy nodded, following the woman through glass doors into an office that somehow managed to be both minimalist and ostentatious. Leonard Carter stood at the window, his back to her, a power play so obvious it almost made her laugh. Mr. Carter, she said, letting a hint of amusement color her voice, I appreciate you taking time from your busy schedule of corporate acquisitions to meet with me. He turned, and Amy felt the full force of his presence, tall, impeccably dressed, in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, with eyes that seemed to calculate her worth in milliseconds. She'd seen photos, of course, but they hadn't captured the intensity he radiated, like a banked fire waiting to burst into flame. Ms. Reed. His voice was deeper than she'd expected, with an undertone that suggested he was also finding something amusing. I've heard interesting things about you, all terrible, I hope. A flash of surprise crossed his face before he masked it. Please sit. He gestured to one of the leather chairs facing his desk. I'm told you have concerns about the Thompson merger. Amy set her briefcase on his desk with deliberate care. Concerns implies uncertainty, Mr. Carter. What I have are facts. She withdrew a thick folder. Specifically, facts about how Carter Technologies has systematically absorbed and dismantled 17 small tech companies in the past 5 years, despite signed agreements to maintain their operational independence. Business evolution, he said smoothly, but she caught the slight tensing of his jaw. The market demands. The market demands innovation, Amy cut in, which is precisely what your company stifles. You buy promising startups, strip their patents, fire their development teams, and reduce groundbreaking technologies to quarterly profit margins. She leaned forward. Thompson Technologies isn't just another acquisition target. They're developing medical AI that could revolutionize early cancer detection. But that's not profitable enough for you, is it? Carter's expression hadn't changed, but something shifted in his eyes. You seem to have strong personal feelings about this, Ms. Reed. I have strong feelings about justice, Mr. Carter, about right and wrong. She met his gaze steadily. Concepts I suspect you consider irrelevant to business. He stood, moving around his desk with the fluid grace of a predator. Justice is subjective. Numbers aren't. Thompson's technology is promising, but their business model is unsustainable. Under Carter Technologies, their research will have the funding and infrastructure it needs to succeed. Under Carter Technologies, their research will be buried the moment it threatens your existing medical technology patents. Amy pulled out another document, like what happened with Biotech Solutions in 2022. Carter went still. Biotech Solutions had been a carefully managed acquisition, the details of its dissolution buried under layers of legal complexity. You're very well informed. I do my homework. Amy allowed herself a small smile. And I'm very, very good at my job. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the expensive desk, two immovable forces testing each other's resolve. Then Carter did something unexpected. He laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his face. Would you like a drink, Ms. Reed? It's 2 in the afternoon, and I have a 30-year-old Macallan that's wasted on most of my visitors. He moved to a hidden cabinet, retrieving a crystal decanter. Besides, I think this conversation might benefit from some lubrication. I don't drink with opposing counsel, Amy said firmly, even as she noted how the afternoon light caught his profile, softening the harsh lines of his face. Afraid it might compromise your judgment? There was a challenge in his voice, a hint of the arrogance she'd expected. Afraid it might compromise yours. She stood, gathering her documents. I'll have my office send over the complete antitrust briefing. I suggest you read it carefully before we proceed further. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. What would it take? Amy looked back. Excuse me? To make this go away. He gestured expansively. Name your price. Partnership at any firm in the city, a foundation in your name. Whatever you want. For a moment, Amy felt a familiar pain in her chest, the echo of her father's voice on his deathbed, speaking of dreams destroyed by corporate greed. She touched the ring at her neck. That's your problem, Mr. Carter. You think everything and everyone has a price. She met his gaze one last time. Some things aren't for sale. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Leonard Carter standing in his office, the untouched Macallan glinting in the afternoon light. He reached into his pocket, fingers finding his mother's compass. For the first time in years, its frozen needle seemed to mock him. Outside, Amy waited for the elevator, her heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with the confrontation. She'd expected a monster, a corporate titan without conscience or complexity. Instead, she'd found something far more dangerous. A man whose carefully constructed walls had cracks and whose eyes held shadows she recognized all too well. The elevator arrived, its mirrored walls reflecting her flushed cheeks. As the doors closed, Amy forced herself to take slow, steady breaths. She couldn't afford to be intrigued by Leonard Carter. She had a job to do, a promise to keep. But as the elevator descended, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in that office, something that would change both their lives forever. Neither of them slept well that night, their minds replaying moments from their encounter, analyzing words and glances with the same precision they usually reserved for contracts and spreadsheets. And in the darkness, two souls accustomed to solitude began to recognize an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the greatest battles aren't fought across negotiating tables, but in the chambers of one's own heart. Leonard hadn't slept in 48 hours. The Biotech Solutions file lay open on his desk, its contents spread across the polished surface like evidence at a crime scene. Amy Reed's voice echoed in his mind. Like what happened with Biotech Solutions in 2022, she'd done more than her homework. She'd uncovered a paper trail he'd thought impossible to trace, connecting dots that his best lawyers had buried under mountains of litigation. His fingers drummed against the desk, a rare display of agitation that hadn't gone unnoticed by his staff. "You look terrible," Eleanor announced, striding into his office unannounced. Only his sister would dare such an entrance. "Claire says you've been here since yesterday morning." Leonard didn't look up from the documents. "I have a situation that requires my attention. The Thompson merger." Eleanor perched on the edge of his desk, ignoring his scowl. "Or the lawyer who's threatening to derail it." Now he did look up, eyes narrowing. "Have you been talking to Mark?" "I had lunch with him yesterday." She picked up one of the papers, scanning it with practiced ease. Years of running the Carter Foundation had given her a sharp eye for details. "He's worried about you, says you've been obsessing over this Amy Reed person." "I don't obsess," Leonard said flatly, taking the paper from her hands. "I strategize." Eleanor's laugh was both fond and exasperated. "Leo, I haven't seen you this worked up since Dad died." She softened her voice. "What is it about her that's gotten under your skin?" The question hit closer to home than he cared to admit. What? Was it about Amy Reed, her defiance, her principles? The way she'd looked at him, not with fear or greed, but with something closer to disappointment. "She's a problem that needs solving," he said finally. "Nothing more." Eleanor stood, smoothing her skirt. "Well, while you're solving that, problem, don't forget about the foundation gala next week. You promised. I said I'd consider it, and I'm telling you you're coming." She fixed him with a look that reminded him painfully of their mother. "The board wants to honor Dad's legacy. They expect both Carter children to be there." Legacy. There was that word again. Leonard's hand went to his pocket, fingers finding the familiar contours of his mother's compass. "I'll have Claire clear my schedule." After Eleanor left, Leonard pulled up Amy Reed's file on his tablet. Professional history, education, personal background, all the usual details his investigators could dig up. But it was the photographs that caught his attention. Amy at various legal functions, always slightly apart from the crowd. Amy leaving her modest Brooklyn apartment, coffee in hand. Amy jogging in Prospect Park, her face free of makeup, hair wild in the morning light. He paused on that last image. There was something about her expression, a peacefulness he hadn't seen in their meeting. His thumb traced the curve of her smile before he caught himself, closing the file with an angry swipe. "Claire!" he called out. His assistant appeared instantly. "Get me everything you can find about Thompson's medical AI program, every paper, every patent application, every research note." "That could take days to compile. You have 12 hours. Alone again, Leonard walked to the window. New York sprawled before him, a maze of steel and glass he'd learned to navigate with ruthless efficiency. But for the first time in years, he felt lost in his own city. His phone buzzed. Mark, requesting another meeting. Probably more bad news. About the merger. Leonard ignored it, his mind already racing ahead to his next move. If Amy Reed wouldn't be bought, perhaps she could be outmaneuvered. Everyone had a weakness. Everyone had something to protect. The thought of exploiting her vulnerabilities should have brought satisfaction. Instead, it left a bitter taste in his mouth. Across town, Amy sat in her own office, surrounded by case files and takeout containers. Her small team had been working, around the clock, building their case against the merger. But her mind kept drifting back to that moment in Carter's office when something raw and human had broken through his corporate mask. Still here? Daniel Wong, her investigative assistant, poked his head in. I found something interesting in the Thompson research papers. Amy straightened, pushing thoughts of Leonard Carter aside. Show me. Daniel spread several documents across her desk. Their AI isn't just for cancer detection. They're developing predictive algorithms for early-onset Alzheimer's. He pointed to a specific paragraph. The kind of research that could have saved your father. Amy's hand went to the ring at her neck. Her father's decline had been rapid. Early-onset Alzheimer's diagnosed too late for any meaningful intervention. She'd watched helplessly as his brilliant mind unraveled, taking with it the dreams of the small tech company he'd built from nothing. Carter can't get his hands on this, she said softly. He'll bury it like he buried biotech's research. About that, Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Someone's been asking questions about your father's company. Discreet questions, but Amy felt her chest tighten. Of course. Carter was digging, looking for pressure points. Let him look, she said more confidently than she felt. There's nothing to find. But later that night, alone in her apartment, Amy pulled out an old photo album. Her father smiled up at her from its pages, standing proud in front of his company's modest offices. The picture had been taken just weeks before, the hostile takeover that destroyed everything he'd built. She'd been in law school then, powerless to help. Never again, she'd promised herself, never again would she watch someone's life's work be crushed by corporate greed. Her phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. Dinner tomorrow? We should discuss the merger in a more informal setting, LC. Amy stared at the message, her heart doing that strange flutter again. How had he gotten her personal number? More importantly, why was she tempted to say yes? Delete, she told herself. Block the number. Stay professional. Instead, she found herself typing, Some of us actually earn our dinners, Mr. Carter. Try doing your own homework for once. His reply came instantly. Is that a challenge, Ms. Reed? Amy put the phone down without responding, but she couldn't stop the smile tugging at her lips. Dangerous, she reminded herself. Leonard Carter was dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with his corporate power. In his penthouse apartment, Leonard read her response with an unfamiliar warmth in his chest. Challenge accepted, he thought, already formulating plans. Amy Reed wanted homework. He'd show her just how thorough he could be. The city lights twinkled beyond his floor-to-ceiling windows, but for once, Leonard wasn't thinking about mergers or market shares. He was thinking about dark eyes that saw through his carefully constructed walls, and a smile that haunted him more than any business threat ever had. His mother's compass sat on his nightstand, its frozen needle catching the city's glow. For the first time in decades, Leonard Carter felt lost and strangely eager to see where this new path might lead. The autumn rain fell in sheets across Brooklyn, turning Prospect Park into a maze of puddles and soggy leaves. Leonard Carter sat in his parked Bentley, feeling ridiculously out of place in this neighborhood. He'd spent 3 hours reviewing Amy's daily routine, determined to engineer a casual encounter that wouldn't seem staged. "This is pathetic," he muttered, fingers drumming on the steering wheel. Leonard Carter didn't stake out women's jogging routes. He didn't sit in cars. In the rain, he especially didn't feel this gnawing uncertainty in his stomach. A flash of movement caught his eye. Through the rain-streaked window, he saw Amy emerging from her building, not in running clothes as expected, but in jeans and an oversized sweater. She carried a canvas tote bag and held no umbrella, letting the rain soak her hair as she walked with purposeful strides. Before he could think better of it, Leonard was out of the car, his Italian leather shoes splashing through puddles. As he followed her, she turned down a side street away from the park and stopped at a building he hadn't noticed in his research, a community center, its brick facade weathered but well-maintained. Amy disappeared inside. Leonard hesitated, then followed, shaking, rain from his coat as he entered. The sound of children's laughter echoed down the hallway, mixed with the murmur of adult voices. He followed the noise to a large room where about 20 kids sat at tables, bent over notebooks and textbooks. And there was Amy, moving between the tables, leaning down to help a young girl with what appeared to be math problems. She looked different here, softer somehow, her professional armor replaced by genuine warmth. "Can I help you?" Leonard turned to find an elderly woman watching him suspiciously. Her nameplate read, "Mrs. Rodriguez, Director." "I'm here to—" He faltered, something that hadn't happened since his first board meeting at 25. "I'm interested in the program." Mrs. Rodriguez's eyes narrowed. "This is our after-school tutoring program for children affected by corporate relocations and layoffs. Are you here to volunteer?" The irony wasn't lost on him. How many of these children's parents had lost their jobs due to his mergers and acquisitions? "Actually," he began, but Amy's voice cut him off. "Mr. Carter." She stood behind Mrs. Rodriguez, her expression a mix of surprise and something else, disappointment. "Following me now?" Mrs. Rodriguez's eyes widened. "Carter, as in Carter. Technologies?" "I can explain," Leonard said, though he wasn't sure he could. "Outside." Amy's tone left no room for argument. She turned to Mrs. Rodriguez. "I'll handle this, Rosa." In the hallway, Amy crossed her arms, water still dripping from her hair. "How did you find me?" "I did my homework," he said, attempting a smile. It fell flat. "This isn't homework, Mr. Carter. This is stalking." But there was less anger in her voice than he expected. "What are you really doing here?" Leonard looked past her to the classroom, where a young boy was now explaining something to his peers, his hands moving animatedly. "What is this place?" "Hope Center. We provide tutoring and support for kids whose families have been impacted by corporate restructuring." The air quotes were audible in her voice. Many of them had parents in tech startups that were acquired and dismantled. The weight of his mother's compass seemed to double in his pocket. "Like your father's company?" Amy went still. "You've been digging." "Neurocrest Technologies," Leonard continued, watching her carefully. "Founded by James Reed, specialized in early detection of neurological disorders, acquired by Meridian Corp in 2018, dissolved 6 months later." He paused. 3 months before your father's diagnosis." "Stop!" Amy's voice cracked. "You don't get to talk about him." "The research could have saved him." "Yes." She met his eyes, and the pain there made him step back. "The algorithms my father developed, they might have caught his condition earlier. But Meridian buried the patents, just like you bury every innovation that threatens your profit margins." Leonard had rehearsed responses for this moment, carefully crafted arguments about market forces and business necessity. Instead, he heard himself ask, "How long have you been volunteering here?" The question seemed to surprise her as much as it surprised him. "Since law school. These kids, They need to know that setbacks don't define them, that they can rebuild. Like you did. Like I'm still doing. She pushed wet hair from her face. Why are you really here, Leonard? It was the first time she'd used his first name. The sound of it in her voice did something to his chest that no amount of hostile takeovers or billion-dollar deals had ever managed. Have dinner with me, he said, the words tumbling out before he could polish them. Not to discuss the merger, just dinner. Amy studied him for a long moment, water dripping from her sweater onto the linoleum floor. Why? Because you make me uncomfortable, he admitted. Because you see through every wall I've built. Because, he gestured helplessly at the classroom, because I want to understand. Understand what? Why this matters more to you than all the money I could offer. Why you look more alive here in a Rainy Community Center than in any corporate boardroom. Why I can't stop thinking about the way you smiled in that park photo. He caught himself too late. You had me followed. There was the anger he'd expected earlier. Standard background check, he lied, knowing she saw through it. Amy shook her head, but he caught the ghost of a smile. You're unbelievable. Is that a yes to dinner? It's a get out of my community center before I call security. But there was no real threat in her voice. And Mr. Carter, next time you want to know something about me, try asking. He was almost to the door when she called after him. Leonard? He turned, heart doing that strange flutter again. The Thompson merger. What if... She hesitated. What if there was a way to make it work? To actually develop their research instead of burying it? For a moment, Leonard saw it through her eyes. Not just numbers on a spreadsheet, but real people, real lives, real potential for change. I'm listening, he said softly. Amy glanced back at the classroom, then at him. Tomorrow. Grimaldi's, in Dumbo, 7 p.m., come alone, leave the corporate lawyers behind. Is this a date, Miss Reed? It's a negotiation, Mr. Carter. But her eyes held something warmer than professional distance. Don't make me regret it. Leonard stepped back into the rain, his expensive suit already ruined. For the first time in years, the compass in his pocket felt warm, as if its frozen needle had finally found something worth pointing toward. Behind him, Amy watched through the community center window, her father's ring heavy against her heart. She was either making the biggest mistake of her career or taking the first step toward something that could change everything, not just for her and Leonard, but for all the families represented by the children behind her. Tomorrow would tell. Grimaldi's was nothing like the restaurants Leonard typically frequented. No Michelin stars, no sommelier, no valet parking, just exposed brick walls, checkered tablecloths, and the best pizza in Brooklyn. He arrived 15 minutes early, having changed suits 3 times, before settling on his least imposing option. The hostess did a double-take when he gave his name. Ms. Reed is already here, she said, leading him past bustling tables to a quiet corner with a view of the Manhattan skyline across the river. Amy sat with her back to the wall, a glass of red wine already in front of her. She'd changed from her earlier rain-soaked outfit into a simple black dress that made Leonard's breath catch. No designer label, he was certain, but she wore it with an elegance that made the women in his usual social circle look overdressed. You're early, she said as he sat down. So are you. A smile played at the corners of her mouth. I always case the location before a negotiation. Old habit. Is that what this is? A negotiation? You tell me. She studied him over the rim of her wine glass. You're the one who followed me to a community center in the rain. Leonard accepted the wine list from the hovering waiter, but didn't open it. I believe you promised to explain a way to make the Thompson merger work. Always business first? Amy leaned back, something challenging in her eyes. When was the last time you had dinner with someone without discussing market, shares or profit margins? The question caught him off guard. I have business dinners all the time. That's not what I asked. Leonard's hand went to his pocket, finding the familiar shape of his compass. 3 years ago, he said finally, the night before my father died. Amy's expression softened. She hadn't expected such honesty. Tell me about him. Why? Because you're touching that compass again. You do it when you're uncomfortable, especially when family comes up. She smiled at his surprise. I'm observant, remember? Leonard withdrew the compass, setting it on the table between them. Its tarnished silver case caught the candlelight. It was my mother's. She used to say that true north isn't always where you expect to find it. And what did your father say? That I'd lost my way. Leonard's laugh held no humor. His last words to me were about legacy, not the company's success, but its impact on people's lives. I told him he was being sentimental. Amy reached across the table, her fingers brushing the compass. May I? He nodded, watching as she opened it carefully. The frozen needle gleamed. It's broken, she said softly. Like father, like son. Their eyes met across the table, and something shifted in the space between them. Amy's hand moved from the compass to cover his. I don't believe that. The waiter returned, breaking the moment. They ordered. Amy insisted he try the margarita pizza. And for a while, they talked about safer things. Her love of classic movies, his secret passion for jazz, their shared addiction to terrible late-night food cart hot dogs. So, Leonard said as they finished the first bottle of wine, tell me about the Thompson proposal. Amy pulled a folded paper from her purse. I had Daniel run the numbers. If you restructure the acquisition as a genuine partnership, maintaining Thompson's research division independently, the profit margins would drop significantly. For the first 2 years, she agreed. But look at the projected market impact once their AI system is fully developed. Early detection doesn't just save lives, Leonard. It creates entirely new treatment pathways, new pharmaceutical opportunities. A whole new market sector. He finished, scanning the figures. She was right. The long-term potential dwarfed the immediate gains from patent acquisition. But the board would never approve the initial investment without guaranteed returns. Unless... Amy hesitated. Unless the Carter Foundation took an active role in the research funding. Leonard looked up sharply. You've been talking to Eleanor. She found me, actually, after she heard about our rain-soaked encounter. Amy's smile turned teasing. Your sister is quite persistent. It runs in the family. He studied her face. In the candlelight. You're trying to save Thompson's research. Why include the foundation? Because I did my homework too. She touched the ring at her neck. The Carter Foundation was your mother's project originally. She believed in using corporate success to fund medical research. Until she died of the same kind of cancer, Thompson's AI might help detect early. Leonard went still. No one talked about his mother's death. Even Eleanor avoided the subject. How did you... Hospital records. Amy's voice was gentle. She was part of an early trial for detection software, but it failed. The company developing it was acquired by Meridian Corp. Leonard finished, the pieces falling into place. The same company that bought your father's research. Life has a way of connecting threads we never see. Amy withdrew her hand, but her eyes held his. Your mother believed in using wealth to make a difference. Your father's last words were about legacy. Maybe it's time to honor both. Leonard stared at the compass, its needle catching the candlelight. For years, he'd carried it as a reminder of loss, of the futility of emotional attachment. Now, for the first time, he saw it differently, as a guide pointing towards something he'd forgotten how to see. The board will fight it, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "So fight back." Amy's eyes blazed with sudden intensity. "You built an empire by sheer force of will. Why not use that same power to build something that matters? And what do you get out of this partnership? Justice." She touched her father's ring. "A chance to prove that profit and purpose aren't mutually exclusive." Leonard found himself leaning forward. "And what about dinner? What do you get out of that?" "That depends." A flush colored her cheeks, visible even in the dim light. Was this really about the merger? "No," he admitted, "though your proposal is brilliant." "Then, why are you here, Leonard?" He looked at her, really looked at her, seeing past the professional facade to the passion that drove her, the pain that shaped her, the hope she still carried despite everything. "Because you make me want to be better," he said simply. "Because you see past what I've become to what I could be." Amy's breath caught. For a moment, the restaurant faded away, leaving only the space between them, charged with possibility. Then her phone buzzed, shattering the moment. She glanced at it, her expression changing. "It's Daniel. There's something you need to see." She slid her phone across the table. Leonard read the message, his face hardening. Someone on his board had been making moves behind his back, preparing to vote against any partnership deal with Thompson. "Your proposal," he said quietly. "How soon can you have it ready? How soon do you need it?" Leonard stood, dropping more than enough cash on the table to cover their meal. "Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., my office." He held out his hand to help her up, electricity sparking where their fingers met. "We're going to war, Ms. Reed." Amy's smile was fierce. "I was hoping you'd say that." They walked out together into the Brooklyn night, the Manhattan skyline glittering across the river. Neither spoke of the moments shared over wine and candlelight, of hands touched and barriers lowered. But something had changed. In them, between them, around them. The compass sat heavy in Leonard's pocket, its needle no longer feeling quite so frozen. And around Amy's neck, her father's ring seemed to hang a little lighter, as if sharing its burden with another soul who finally understood its weight. Tomorrow would bring battles and boardrooms, but tonight, they walked together in comfortable silence, two warriors preparing for a fight that would either destroy them both or forge something entirely new from the ruins of who they used to be. The Carter Technologies boardroom hummed with tension. Leonard stood at the window, watching the sunrise paint Manhattan in shades of gold and shadow. Behind him, Amy was arranging documents with precise movements, each paper a weapon in their arsenal. "They're here," Claire announced from the doorway. Her eyes flickered between Leonard and Amy, noting their proximity. The coffee cups from the same shop, the unspoken current of energy between them. Board members filed in, their expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. Richard Waters, Leonard's longest-serving board member and his father's old friend, was the last to enter. His face betrayed nothing, but Leonard had learned to read the subtle signs of betrayal over years of corporate warfare. "Quite an early meeting, Leonard," Waters said, settling into his usual seat. "And with opposing counsel present, no less." "Ms. Reed isn't here as opposing counsel." Leonard turned from the window, letting his gaze sweep the room. "She's here as our partner in reimagining the Thompson acquisition." A murmur rippled through the board. Waters' eyebrows rose. "Partner? Last I checked, she was trying to block the merger." "Plans change." Leonard nodded to Amy, who began distributing folders with quiet efficiency. "Ms. Reed has helped us see an opportunity we've been missing." Amy stepped forward, her presence commanding attention despite Waters' dismissive glance. "The proposal before you outlines a restructured acquisition that would maintain Thompson's research division as a semi-autonomous entity, backed by significant investment from the Carter Foundation." "The foundation?" Waters's laugh held no humor. That's Eleanor's charity project. It has no place in this discussion. My mother's project, actually. Leonard's voice cut through the room like steel. And it has every place in this discussion. He moved to the head of the table, aware of Amy watching him, her presence somehow both challenging and supporting. For years, we've built this company. Through aggressive acquisition and patent consolidation, it's been profitable, it's been safe. He paused, letting his words sink in. It's been wrong. Sentiment has no place in business, Waters snapped. Your father understood that. Did he? Leonard withdrew his mother's compass, placing it on the table. His last words to me were about legacy, about impact. I thought he was being weak. I was wrong. Amy stepped closer, her shoulder nearly touching his. The numbers don't lie, gentlemen. Page 3 shows the projected market impact of fully developing Thomson's AI system. Page 4 details the potential healthcare applications. Page 5 shows a significant short-term loss, Waters interrupted. The board has a responsibility to our shareholders. The board has a responsibility to innovation, Leonard countered, to progress, to actually making a difference instead of just making money. And this sudden change of heart, Waters's eyes flickered to Amy, wouldn't have anything to do with personal considerations. The room went deadly quiet. Leonard felt Amy stiffen beside him. But before he could respond, she spoke. Mr. Waters, her voice carried the same steel as Leonard's. 3 years ago, Meridian Corporation buried revolutionary neurological detection software that could have saved countless lives. One of those lives was my father's. She touched the ring at her neck. The same year Mrs. Carter died of cancer that another buried technology might have detected early. How many more lives are you willing to sacrifice for your profit margins? Waters flushed. You're out of line. No, Leonard cut in. She's exactly in line, and so am I, for the first time in years. He spread his hands on the table, leaning forward. I own controlling interest in this company. I can force this through. But I'd rather have your support in building something that matters. And if we refuse, Waters challenged, then resign. Leonard's smile held no warmth. Because this is happening, with or without you. The next hour was a blur of questions, arguments, and counter-proposals. Amy handled the technical details with razor precision, while Leonard navigated the political undercurrents he'd spent years mastering. Slowly, grudgingly, the board began to turn. When the last member filed out, Leonard closed the door and leaned against it, exhausted. That was incredible, Amy finished. She was gathering her papers, hands shaking slightly from leftover adrenaline. You were incredible. We were incredible. He crossed to her, close enough to catch the scent of her perfume. I couldn't have done this without you. She looked up, and suddenly the space between them seemed too small and too vast all at once. Leonard, have dinner with me again, he said softly. Not for negotiations, not for business, just, yes. The word escaped before she could stop it. His hand rose to touch her cheek, but Claire's knock shattered the moment. Mr. Carter, your sister's here. They stepped apart as Eleanor burst in, her face flushed with excitement. Is it true? The foundation partnership, the research initiative? She stopped short, taking in their proximity, the charged atmosphere. Oh, I'm interrupting. No, Amy said quickly, gathering her things. I was just leaving, meeting at Thomson tomorrow to discuss transition plans. Leonard nodded, fighting the urge to ask her to stay. 8 a.m. I'll send a car. I can drive myself. But her smile held promise. After she left, Eleanor turned to her brother with knowing eyes. Well, when I suggested talking to her about the foundation, I didn't expect this. There is no this, Leonard protested. but his hand went to his pocket, finding the compass warm to the touch. Really? Eleanor perched on his desk. Because I haven't seen you look at anyone that way since... ever. She challenges me. She changes you. Eleanor's voice softened. For the better. Leonard stared out at the city, seeing it differently now. Each building represented not just assets and opportunities, but lives, dreams, potential. She makes me want to be the man Mom and Dad always hoped I'd be. Then don't let her go. Eleanor squeezed his arm. Even if it scares you, especially if it scares you. After she left, Leonard sat at his desk, Amy's proposal open before him. Between the pages, he'd caught glimpses of numbers that weren't in the official document. Calculations about the community center's funding needs, notes about educational programs for affected families. She'd been thinking beyond the merger, beyond their immediate battle. She'd been thinking about real change, lasting impact. His phone buzzed with a text from her. Thank you for today, for everything. Leonard smiled, fingers tracing the words. The compass sat on his desk, and for the first time in years, its needle seemed to quiver with possibility, pointing toward a future he was only beginning to imagine. Outside his office, New York continued its eternal dance of commerce and ambition, but inside, something had shifted. In him, in his world, in the very foundations of the empire he'd built, and for the first time, he welcomed the change. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the Thompson transition, board resistance, the delicate balance of business and personal transformation. But tonight, Leonard Carter felt something he hadn't experienced since childhood. Hope, the kind of hope that comes with finding your true north. The Thompson Technologies lobby buzzed with nervous energy as employees gathered around screens displaying Leonard Carter's press conference. Amy stood at the back of the crowd, watching his image as he announced the restructured merger. Carter Technologies isn't just acquiring Thompson, Leonard was saying, his usual corporate mask softened by something new. We're partnering with them to revolutionize medical detection technology. This isn't about patents or profits, it's about saving lives. A young programmer near Amy wiped tears from her eyes. We really get to keep our jobs? Continue our research? Amy touched her, father's ring, smiling. Yes, all of it. Her phone buzzed with a text from Leonard. Look up. She turned to find him standing in the lobby doorway, having somehow slipped away from the press conference. The crowd parted as he walked toward her, murmurs following in his wake. Shouldn't you be handling the media? She asked as he reached her. Eleanor's better at it anyway. His eyes held hers. Walk with me? They ended up in Thompson's research lab, now empty as everyone watched the ongoing press coverage. Screens displayed complex neural networks, each representing thousands of potential early diagnoses. Your father would be proud, Leonard said softly. Amy traced her fingers along a monitor showing brain scan analyses. He used to say that technology, without compassion, is just expensive noise. She turned to face him. Thank you for everything. Don't thank me yet. Leonard's expression darkened. Waters resigned this morning. Took 3 board members with him. Good riddance. They've joined Meridian Corp's board. The implications hit her hard. Meridian, the company that had buried her father's research. They'll try to block the partnership. They'll try to destroy it. Leonard moved closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. Are you ready for another war with you? The words came out softer than she intended. Always. Something shifted in his eyes. His hand rose to her face, thumb brushing her cheek with impossible gentleness. Amy, The lab door burst open. They jumped apart as Daniel rushed in, waving his tablet. "Amy, you need to see this." Meridian's filing injunctions against the merger, claiming patent interference with... He stopped short, taking in their proximity. "Oh, sorry, I'll come back." "No," Amy said quickly, stepping away from Leonard. "Show me." Daniel pulled up. Documents showing Meridian's legal strategy. They were claiming that Thompson's AI research, built on patents they'd acquired, including James Reed's original work. "They're using my father's research to block this?" Amy's voice shook with rage. Leonard's hand found her shoulder, steadying her. "We'll fight them." "It's not just that." Daniel scrolled through more documents. "They're launching a PR campaign, painting the Carter-Thompson partnership as a monopolistic takeover. They're even digging into personal histories, both your families." Amy felt Leonard tense beside her. "My mother's medical records?" Daniel nodded grimly. "And Amy's father's decline. They're planning to use it all." "Bastards," Leonard muttered. His phone buzzed. Eleanor, warning him about reporters gathering outside both companies. "We need to get ahead of this." "The Foundation Gala," Amy said suddenly. "It's tomorrow night, right?" Leonard nodded. "Eleanor's been planning it for months, a tribute to our parents' legacy." "Then let's use it." Amy's mind raced with possibilities. "Instead of just rich people writing checks, we showcase the real impact of medical technology. Bring in families affected by early detection failures. Show what Thompson's research could prevent. Put faces to the statistics," Leonard caught her excitement. "Make it personal." "Very personal." Amy touched her father's ring. "I'll tell my story, all of it." Leonard's eyes widened. "Amy, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." She met his gaze steadily. "Your mother's death, my father's illness. They're not just ammunition for Meridian. They're the reason we're fighting." He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "We'll tell both stories. Together." Daniel cleared his throat. "I'll start making calls. Get everything ready for tomorrow." He headed for the door, then turned back. "Amy, the reporters outside..." "I'll handle it," Leonard said. "Take my private elevator to the parking garage. Claire will make sure the way is clear." After Daniel left, they stood in charged silence, surrounded by screens showing the very technology they were fighting to protect. "Come to the gala with me," Leonard said suddenly. Amy blinked. "What?" "Not just as a speaker, not just as a partner." He took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "Be my date." "Leonard." She looked down at their joined hands. "The press will have a field day. They'll say I manipulated you, that the whole partnership is because I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them. Amy's heart thundered in her chest. "Are you?" she whispered. Instead of answering, he drew her closer, his free hand cupping her face. This time, when he leaned in, there were no interruptions. The kiss was gentle at first, a question more than a demand. Then Amy's hands slid into his hair, and gentleness gave way to something deeper, more urgent. Years of barriers crumbled as they clung to each other in the dim lab, surrounded by technology that might have saved their parents, now offering them a chance at their own salvation. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Amy rested her forehead against his chest. "This complicates everything. Everything worth having is complicated." Leonard's lips brushed her temple. "Is that a yes to the gala?" Amy laughed softly. "Yes, to all of it." Later that night, alone in his penthouse, Leonard held his mother's compass, its needle catching moonlight. For the first time since her death, he felt truly directed, focused not just on wealth or power, but on a purpose worth fighting for. His phone lit up with a message from Amy. "Thank you for helping me find true north." Leonard smiled, touching the words on the screen. Tomorrow would bring battles on all fronts, legal, personal, public. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't fighting just to win. He was fighting for something real, something lasting, something that felt remarkably like love. In Brooklyn, Amy stood at her apartment window, holding her father's ring up to the city lights. "I'm doing it, Dad," she whispered. "I'm making it right." The ring gleamed in response, its weight now feeling less like a burden and more like a blessing, guiding her toward a future she'd never dared to imagine. One where justice and love could coexist, where corporate power could serve a greater good, where two broken people might just make each other whole. The Carter Foundation Gala transformed the Metropolitan Museum's Temple of Dender into a glittering fusion of past and future. Holographic displays showcased medical breakthroughs alongside ancient Egyptian healing symbols, while New York's elite mingled with doctors, researchers, and families affected by early detection failures. Eleanor had outdone herself. Each table featured not just place cards, but stories, photographs, and testimonials from people whose lives had been changed by medical technology or who had lost loved ones for lack of it. Leonard stood at the entrance, adjusting his bow tie for the 100th time. The compass sat in his tuxedo pocket, warmer than ever. Nervous? Eleanor appeared beside him, resplendent in emerald silk. "I don't get nervous." "Right." She smiled, knowingly. "That's why you've been checking your phone every 30 seconds. Before he could respond, a ripple of murmurs spread through the arriving guests. Leonard turned to see Amy descending the museum's grand staircase, and his world stopped, turning. She wore a deep blue gown that seemed to float around her, its simplicity elegant against the ornate backdrop. Her father's ring hung on a delicate silver chain, catching the light with each step. But it was her eyes that held him, bright, with purpose, tinged with vulnerability. "Breathe, big brother," Eleanor whispered, nudging him forward. Leonard met Amy at the bottom of the stairs, aware of dozens of phones capturing the moment. "You look terrified?" Amy's smile was shaky. "I've never spoken in front of a crowd like this." He took her hand, bringing it to his lips. "I was going to say beautiful." A camera flash caught the gesture. Amy tensed. "The press. Let them see." Leonard tucked her hand into his arm. "I'm done hiding what matters." They made their way through the crowd, greeting guests and answering questions about the Thompson partnership. Amy handled each interaction with grace, her legal precision softened by genuine empathy for the families sharing their stories. "Carter!" They turned to find Richard Waters approaching, his smile sharp as a blade. "Quite a spectacle you've arranged, though I suppose romance does make for good press." "Richard," Leonard's voice held warning, "I didn't expect to see you here. The Foundation board still includes Meridian representatives." Waters' eyes slid to Amy. "Miss Reed, you look lovely, though I wonder if your father would approve of your methods." Amy's grip on Leonard's arm tightened, but her voice remained steady. "My father believed in using every tool available to fight for what's right, including love." Waters' smile faltered. Before he could respond, Eleanor's voice rang out through the sound system. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our program is about to begin." Leonard led Amy to the central table, where Eleanor waited with Daniel and Key Thompson executives. As they sat, he noticed Amy's hands trembling slightly. "We can still change the plan," he murmured. She shook her head. "No, it's time for truth." Eleanor took the stage, welcoming guests and speaking about their parents' legacy. Then she introduced Leonard, who rose to address the crowd. 25 years ago," he began, "my mother discovered a lump in her breast." His voice carried through the hushed room. By the time traditional screening confirmed it, the cancer had spread. She spent her final months funding research into early detection technology. believing that while she couldn't be saved, others could be. He withdrew the compass, holding it up. "She gave me this before she died. Said that true north isn't always where you expect to find it. I didn't understand then. I thought success meant profit, power, control. I was wrong." His eyes found Amy. "Sometimes it takes someone extraordinary to show you what really matters." Amy stood, joining him at the podium. The ring gleamed at her throat as she faced the crowd. "5 years ago," she said, her voice clear despite her nerves, "my father began forgetting things, small things at first, names, dates, appointments. By the time he was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's, the damage was irreversible." She touched the ring. His company had developed algorithms for early neurological detection, technology that might have saved him, but that technology was buried, deemed less profitable than existing treatments. Murmurs rippled through the audience. In the back, waters shifted uncomfortably. "Tonight isn't about assigning blame," Amy continued. "It's about choosing a different path forward. The Thomson-Carter partnership isn't just a business deal. It's a commitment to putting innovation above profit, lives above dividends." Leonard took her hand. "Which is why we're announcing the creation of the Reed Carter Medical Innovation Fund, $10 billion dedicated to developing and implementing early detection technology worldwide." Gasps echoed through the room. Even Eleanor looked shocked. They hadn't told her about the fund. "My mother believed in using wealth for good," Leonard said. "Amy's father believed in using technology to save lives. Today, we honor both their legacies." Applause erupted, drowning out Waters' attempt to speak. Phones buzzed with breaking news alerts as the announcement hit the financial wires. Later, as the orchestra played and couples swayed on the dance floor, Leonard held Amy close. "10 billion?" she whispered against his chest. "When did you decide that?" "The moment you agreed to be my date." He smiled into her hair. "Seemed like a reasonable courtship gift." "Leonard Carter, was that a joke? I'm full of surprises." His hand traced patterns on her back. "Speaking of which..." He stepped back slightly, reaching into his pocket. Amy's breath caught as he withdrew not a ring but a key. "What's this?" "The key to my mother's private lab at Carter Technologies. I've never shown it to anyone." His eyes held hers. "I thought maybe we could use it for the fund's headquarters." Amy stared at the key, understanding its significance. This wasn't just about money or business. This was Leonard sharing a piece of his closely guarded heart. "Are you sure?" "About the lab," he pulled her closer. "About you, about us, yes to all of it." She kissed him then, not caring about the cameras or whispers or tomorrow's headlines. The compass in his pocket pressed between them, its needle, finally, truly pointing towards something real. Across the room, Eleanor watched them with tears in her eyes, remembering her mother's words about true north and her father's last wishes about legacy. Sometimes, she thought, love was the best business strategy of all. Waters stormed out, already calling Meridian's board. But for once, Leonard didn't care about corporate threats or market reactions. He was too busy learning that some things, like the way Amy fit perfectly in his arms, or how her smile could light up an ancient temple, were worth more than all the profits in the world. The night wore on, Egyptian gods watching silently as two healing legacies merged into one, guided by a broken compass and a father's ring, pointing toward a future where love and justice danced together under museum lights. The morning after, the gala, Leonard's mother's lab still smelled of dust and memory. Shafts of sunlight cut through decades-old blinds, illuminating covered equipment and boxes of research notes. Amy moved through the space reverently, touching old photographs, examining faded diagrams. She documented everything, Amy said, leafing through a journal. Every trial, every setback, every breakthrough. Leonard stood in the doorway, watching her. He hadn't entered this room since his mother's death. But seeing Amy here made it feel right somehow. She believed in leaving a roadmap for others to follow. The peaceful moment shattered as Eleanor burst in, tablet in hand. "Turn on the news, now!" Leonard grabbed the remote for the lab's ancient TV. The screen flickered to life, showing Richard Waters at a Meridian press conference. Deeply concerned about the ethical implications of the Thompson-Carter merger, Waters was saying, "What we're seeing is a personal relationship compromising corporate governance. Ms. Reed's romantic involvement with Leonard Carter raises serious questions about the legitimacy of this partnership." Amy's hands clenched around the journal. "He's trying to make it look like I seduced you into the deal." "That's not all," Eleanor said grimly. "Meridian's filing a lawsuit claiming Thompson's AI builds on proprietary technology, including your father's research, Amy. They're demanding all development halt immediately." Leonard's phone buzzed with messages from board members and investors, all demanding explanations. But his eyes were on Amy, who stood very still, staring at her father's ring. "They're using my father's work to destroy everything he believed in," she whispered. Leonard crossed to her, but before he could speak, Daniel called. "Amy!" His voice crackled through the speakerphone. "Meridian's lawyers are serving papers at Thompson. They're claiming breach of confidentiality, saying you used insider knowledge from your father's case to guide the merger." "That's ridiculous," Leonard snapped. "Amy wasn't even involved in her father's company." Silence filled the line. "Amy?" Eleanor's voice was gentle. Amy's face had gone pale. "I was an intern the summer before law school. I had access to some of the research files." Leonard stepped back. "You never told me." "It wasn't relevant. I didn't use any." "It's completely relevant." His voice turned hard, corporate. "This could invalidate everything. The merger, the fund, all of it." "Leonard, why didn't you?" "And tell me?" The hurt in his eyes cut deeper than anger would have. Amy touched his arm, but he pulled away. "I need to call the board," he said coldly. "Eleanor, get our legal team ready. Daniel, freeze all Thompson research activity until further." "A notice, Leo," Eleanor started, but he was already striding out. Amy stood in the suddenly silent lab, surrounded by another brilliant woman's abandoned dreams. Her father's ring felt heavy, accusing. "He'll come around," Eleanor said softly. "Will he?" Amy picked up her mother's journal. "Or will he decide, I'm just another liability to manage?" The day dissolved into a blur of legal meetings and press statements. Leonard retreated behind his CEO mask, speaking to Amy only through lawyers. She threw herself into building their defense, working until her eyes burned. Past midnight, she found herself back in the lab, seeking something. Answers, hope, a way forward. She was deep in her mother's journals when the door opened. Leonard stood there looking as exhausted as she felt. "The board wants me to cut ties," he said without preamble. "Personal and professional, clean break, clear message to the market." Amy's heart clenched. "And what do you want?" "What I want," he laughed harshly. "I want to understand why you kept this from me. I want to know if any of it was real, or if I was just a means to an end." "How can you ask that?" Amy stood, anger finally breaking through her guilt. "You want to talk about means to ends? How many lives have you destroyed chasing profits? How many dreams have you buried?" She held up his mother's journal. "Your mother understood that some things matter more than money. When did you forget that? Don't talk about my mother." "Why not? She's the reason we're here. She and my father. They knew the cost of putting profits over people. They paid it with their lives." Leonard's face twisted. "That's not fair." Amy stepped closer. "No, it's not. Neither is letting Waters destroy everything we've built because you're scared." "Scared?" Leonard's voice rose. "I'm trying to protect the company." "No," Amy cut in. You're trying to protect yourself from feeling, from caring, from risking anything real." She softened her voice. "I didn't tell you about the internship because it didn't matter. Nothing I saw then has anything to do with what we're building now. But if you want to use it as an excuse to run away, to go back to being the cold, calculating CEO," she swallowed hard, "then maybe Waters is right about you." The words hung between them like physical things. Leonard's hand went to his pocket, finding the compass. "I can't lose the company," he said finally. "It's all I have." "That's not true." Amy moved closer, covering his hand and the compass with hers. "Not anymore." He looked down at their joined hands, at the ring hanging at her throat, at the years of dust and dreams surrounding them in his mother's lab. "Waters will come after everything," he warned. "Let him try." Amy's eyes blazed. "Your mother left a roadmap, remember? And I think I just found something in her journals that changes everything." She led him to the workbench, where papers lay spread out. "Look at these trial notes. The cancer detection algorithm your mother was working on. It shares core architecture with my father's neurological scanning system. They were working on parallel paths without knowing it." Leonard's hands shook as he read. "This proves that neither technology was independently viable," Amy finished. "They needed each other, just like Thompson's AI needs both approaches to work." She met his eyes. "Just like we need each other." For a long moment, Leonard stared at the papers. His mother's legacy intertwined with her father's, pointing toward a future neither could have achieved alone. Then he pulled out his phone. "Eleanor, call an emergency board meeting first thing tomorrow." He looked at Amy. "We're going to war." The night deepened around them as they built their strategy, surrounded by ghosts and dreams and possibilities. When dawn broke, it found them still working, their shadows merging on the lab's dusty floor. Leonard watched Amy annotating his mother's journals, her dedication matching the fierce notes in the margins. The compass in his pocket hummed with certainty, no longer pointing north, but toward something better, toward her. Tomorrow would bring battles and challenges, but tonight, in this room where his mother had fought her last fight, Leonard Carter finally understood what true strength looked like. It looked like Amy Reed, fierce and brilliant and unstoppable. It looked like love. The Carter Technologies boardroom crackled with tension. On one side sat Leonard and Amy, flanked by Eleanor and their legal team. On the other, Waters and Meridian's. Executives watched with predatory anticipation. Between them lay decades of research, 2 family legacies, and the future of medical innovation. Sunrise painted Manhattan in shades of possibility as Leonard stood to address the gathered boards. Investors and press. Amy watched him, seeing not the ruthless CEO she'd first met, but the man who'd learned to fight for something bigger than profit. 5 weeks ago, Leonard began, his voice carrying quiet authority, I thought I knew what success looked like. Numbers on a spreadsheet, market dominance, power. He smiled slightly. I was wrong. Murmurs rippled through the room. Waters shifted uncomfortably. My mother died because medical technology prioritized profit over innovation. Amy's father died because corporate greed buried life-saving research. Leonard's hand found the compass in his pocket. Today, we're choosing a different path. Amy stood, taking her place beside him. Together, they unveiled the evidence they'd discovered in his mother's lab, the parallel research, the complementary innovations, the potential that had been lost and could now be reclaimed. Meridian's lawsuit claims Thompson's AI builds on stolen technology, Amy said, her voice steady. They're right. It builds on all of it, on my father's work, on Catherine Carter's research, on decades of innovation that should never have been buried. She gestured to the screens where Daniel was displaying technical diagrams. But here's what they don't want you to see. None of these technologies works alone. The breakthrough comes from combining them, from letting innovation flow freely, instead of locking it away in corporate vaults. Waters stood, his face flushed. This is absurd. You can't. Actually, we can. Eleanor stepped forward, tablet in hand. The Carter Foundation's original charter, written by my mother, includes a provision for compulsory technology sharing in cases of demonstrable public good. She smiled sweetly. Did you really think we wouldn't find it? Leonard watched Waters, pale as the implications sank in. We're not just defending the Thompson merger, he continued. We're proposing something bigger. The Reed-Carter Medical Innovation Fund will create an open research platform, pooling resources and knowledge from every participating company. You'll destroy the market, Waters sputtered. We'll save lives, Amy corrected. She turned to address the room directly. Every year we delay, every innovation we bury, costs thousands of lives. Parents, children, brilliant minds lost because we put profits over people. She touched her father's ring. No more. Leonard moved closer to her, their shoulders touching. The choice is simple. Join us in building something that matters, or watch from the sidelines as the future of medicine changes without you. The room erupted in questions and arguments. Through it all, Leonard and Amy stood united, fielding challenges with the strength of their shared conviction. Hours later, as the sun set over Manhattan, the votes were tallied. The Thompson merger would proceed, the Innovation Fund would launch, and Meridian would join as a founding partner, with Waters conspicuously absent from its board. In his mother's lab, now humming with new energy as researchers began moving in, Leonard found Amy standing by the window. "Hey," he said softly. She turned, smiling through tears. "Hey yourself, corporate revolutionary. Terrible for my reputation." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, both of them watching the city lights blink on. "Though not as terrible as this." He stepped back, turning her to face him. Amy's breath caught as he sank to one knee. "Leonard." "I had a whole speech prepared," he said, withdrawing not a ring box, but his mother's compass. "About true north and finding direction, and probably some terrible business metaphors." Amy laughed, even as tears spilled down her cheeks. "But the truth is simpler." He opened the compass, revealing a delicate diamond ring nestled where the needle once sat. "You changed everything, Amy Reed. My world, my heart, my understanding of what matters." His voice roughened. "Marry me, fight beside me, build this legacy with me." Amy knelt with him on the lab floor, taking his face in her hands. "Did you really think I'd say anything but yes?" The kiss that followed was witnessed only by the ghosts of dreams past and the promise of dreams to come. When they finally parted, Amy laughed. "The compass doesn't point north anymore." "No," Leonard agreed, sliding the ring onto her finger. "It points to you. Always has. I just didn't know it." Later that night they stood on the rooftop of Carter Technologies. The city spread before them like a sea of possibilities. Eleanor had arranged a small celebration, just family and close friends, nothing like the grand gala of the week before. Amy's father's ring now shared its chain with Catherine Carter's compass, the two symbols hanging together over her heart. Leonard watched her laughing with Eleanor, his mother's ring glinting on her finger, and felt a peace he'd never known. Daniel approached, champagne in hand. "So, what's next for the corporate power couple?" Leonard smiled, thinking of the research already underway, the lives they would touch, the future they would build together. "Everything," he said simply. "Everything that matters." Across the roof, Amy caught his eye and smiled, that brilliant, world-changing smile that had first cracked his carefully constructed walls. She touched the compass and ring at her throat, then mouthed 3 words that meant more than any merger agreement. "I love you." Leonard crossed to her, drawn, as always, by the force of her conviction, her passion, her love. As he took her in his arms, the city lights witnessed a new kind of corporate merger, one of hearts, of purpose, of shared dreams. Above them, stars pierced the New York sky, each one a possible life to be saved, a dream to be realized, a future to be built. And in that moment, both Leonard and Amy knew with absolute certainty that they had found their true north. Not in success or power or even justice alone, but in the love that made all of it worth fighting for. The compass hung steady between them, no longer needed to find their way. They had something better now, each other, a shared purpose, and a legacy of love that would change not just their world, but the world of everyone their work would touch. It was, they both knew, only the beginning, the end. That was a beautiful story, wasn't it? I hope you enjoyed it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your collaboration is very important to me.